From the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight as we continue to dial in on what Sean Payton's impact will be on this roster. We're going to stick with the offensive side of the ball, Ben, and let's talk about the rest of the team on the offensive side of the ball outside of the quarterback. How does the addition of Sean Payton impact the receivers on this team, the tight ends, the offensive line, and running back?
Well, I think that Sean Payton has certain archetypes that he looks for in players, and it's less about speed, more about being able to catch the football. He does like to roster a burner, and that'll be a guy that's out there. Ted Ginn was that guy for a long time. Devery Henderson was that guy for a long time. He does like to roster a guy that can take the top off, but that's not really how this offense is predicated. It's predicated on possession guys that can make a little bit after the catch. You look at someone in the archetype of a Jarvis Landry as kind of your wide receiver too. Somebody put the ball in his hands, let him create. Jerry Jeudy would be ideal for that kind of role. And then the wide receiver one is going to be somebody you can just hammer on the slant. They did Michael Thomas for a long time. Marcus Colston was a guy they did that for a long time. That fits the archetype of a Tim Patrick or a Cortland Sutton. Somebody can use the body to box out, and bully press man and get open quick if you got a quarterback to make that throw. And then the tight end. The tight end, he usually wants a very athletic seam stretcher tight end that gives the threat of four verticals, and that fits what Greg Dulcich does. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they look like. The running back does need to be able to catch out of the backfield. You're going to have to. You're going to get a lot of targets. The running back's going to get a lot of work. And so you'll have a specialized kind of goal line back. Latavius will probably eventually become that guy. But you're going to need to be a guy that can catch out of the backfield early on, like Kamara did, or Reggie Bush, guys that have been in the Sean Payton offense for a long time.
Yeah, I think Javonte Williams can do that. That's one of those things. Now the question becomes, okay, well, if Javonte is a little bit not quite ready for the start of the season, is that a Chase Edmonds kind of role, who is on the roster, and maybe they'd look for a bit of a restructure based on his contract. But Chase Edmonds, could he fit the Alvin Kamara role?
Not over the course of a season, I don't believe. I don't think he's that guy. He just gets dinged up a little too much, and I don't think he brings what Kamara brings to the table. But you can kind of plug him in for a little while to be that guy. I think he's more of a tertiary back when all's said and done. I think he would be the guy that would be a placeholder for Javonte until he was healthy and ready. Javonte is probably much more in the Kamara role than Chase Edmonds. Edmonds is a guy, I think he's like I said, serviceable as a spot start guy, not really a guy you want to rely on for a season.
Right, but that's the point, is you're looking for what can we do in the meantime until Javonte's 100% or close to it and available to you. And it might be he's pretty close to the start of the season and maybe just a little bit after, but if you can get Chase Edmonds and Latavius Murray as sort of your 1-2 back and work through that, especially with Latavius having the experience in this offense, I think that's going to be very beneficial for what they're going to be trying to do. Let's go to the tight ends there, because I'm 100% with you on what Greg Dulcich can be. And we also saw what Jimmy Graham, as you mentioned, can be in the red zone for the Saints offense. So I do wonder if that's a Dulcich role, or maybe that's an even Albert Okwuegbunam, who's in the last year of his contract.
Yeah, I think that both those guys will get a shot. Obviously Dulcich is going to be here a while, but I think Alberto will get another shot with this staff, and I do think that he'll be a red zone type of guy. He's got the height, and he's got the leaping ability to be able to go up and get stuff, and I think that's what Sean Payton is going to hammer to Russ in the red zone. Hey, maybe you can't see the whole field, but you can certainly see these tall guys going up, put it up, let them go make a play. Put the ball up, let them go make a jump ball play on it. And so I think you'll see some of that kind of stuff. You'll see a lot of Alberto in the corner of the end zone type plays. You should see a smattering of that, assuming O can stay healthy and doesn't get back in the doghouse. That would be ideal. Most of the tight ends that New Orleans had over the years were guys that were just hyper athletic kind of guys. Even Taysom Hill played tight end there for some stretch. So I think that's really what it is. It's about the athleticism. It's about the ability to give the threat of the vertical stretch on the seam, but at the same time, the leaping ability in the red zone to go up there and get a football.
All right, now to the wide receivers. It was interesting because I was in a conversation with Dave Logan. We were trying to figure out how Jerry Jeudy fits into any kind of archetype of what they've had in the past, right? We were just like going through the list of receivers, like, well, he's had some straight line speed guys, but Jerry's really not that guy. He's fast enough, but he's more of the quicks off the line. And I love that you brought up Jarvis Landry. That would be as close to it as you get, because honestly, outside of that, I don't think Drew Brees had a guy like Jerry Jeudy through most of his career.
No, they drafted a guy in Traquan Smith who
that
would
was
be
the
like
guy I brought
the
up.
poor man's Jerry Jeudy a couple of years back. to kind of look for that. But really, the guy you're going to have, if you're looking at the offense on the right-hand side, when they were running the Breeze offense, or the majority of the Payton offense, on the right-hand side, you're going to have your Michael Thomas or Marcus Colston, whatever, your big body guys running the slant over here. And then on the backside, you're going to have your guy that can create after the catch, and he's usually coming back across inside the numbers to bring him into the kind of into the frame. And so whatever the concept may be, if you're going square in or you run him on a drag, whatever, the idea is to put the ball in his hands, let him create after the catch. And it's a role that if you go back and look at other offenses over the years that have had guys in there, the Golden Tate played very well, kind of that number 2 guy that he was a running back who got converted to receiver. You put the ball in his hands and let him create. He's hard to bring down. Jerry would kind of be that guy. I don't think Jerry's going to be the vertical threat in this offense. I know he was last year for the Broncos, but I don't think that's his best role, to be honest with you. I think his best role is making you miss. And so if he can hang on to the football and show that those drop problems are over and be that reliable guy, on the backside of the play, then he'll have a role here, because I think Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton are going to get the crack at kind of the Mike Thomas role.
Yeah, we really haven't seen the ceiling, I think, for Jerry Jeudy. But on the Mike Thomas role, I think that's an interesting discussion, too, because you talked about the emphasis on being very sure-handed, and you're 1,000% correct, especially when we talk about what Tim Patrick has been over the course of his career, which makes you do wonder for the Broncos as maybe they're considering their options of the receivers. Maybe they decide Courtland Sutton is a trade target guy that they look at. So I'm not saying that I'm rooting for that. I'm just saying there's a certain amount of the way you just described all that is saying, well, you might have 2 of the same guy on this roster, which is a discussion we had. And you say it's great to have that depth, especially when one of them goes down, like Tim Patrick did in training camp. But you can only plan for so many eventualities. Eventually, you need to have some guys step up that are deep roster guys. So this is one of those situations where if you're having a battle there, and if you're Sean Payton, you're already coming into this, maybe you have a bit of a lean on who ends up being in that role. And honestly, let's just call it what it is. Tim Patrick has been more successful in that, hey, I'm gonna put this guy over the middle and have him come up with big time third down catches. He's been more consistent.
Yes, and Tim Patrick has been a guy who's been more sure-handed, across the board. And so, I'm not saying that he has the edge, but he's the more cost-effective option. And so he's going to get a crack at this. And being that guy, and this could be the offense that propels Tim Patrick into the stratosphere. It really could. We were asked the question, or I was asked the question rather, on a radio program out of market after the Sean Payton hire, who's the player that stands to benefit the most from Sean Payton being hired? And everybody kept trying to say Russell Wilson. I said, man, honestly, it could be Tim Patrick. It could be Tim Patrick just because of that Mike Thomas role, and he is absolutely the perfect guy to come in and snap that role up.
All right, so let's get to the offensive line here for a little bit. And you talked a little bit about it in the last video, just more of you're not going to be doing the wide zone blocking. You're going to be going power gap, and that's what he has predominantly run there. So there's familiarity. I mean, with this offensive line, without how many coaching changes, there's familiarity with all the styles of blocking. But even last year when we thought we'd see a lot more wide zone, maybe towards the tail end of the year, we started seeing a little bit more of that, but it wasn't consistent. And certainly a lot of the guys, I think, who got a certain body type into the year thought that they were going to be running the wide zone. They need to be a little more lean, a little more athletic. Well, now you're back to what you know will be power gap. So understanding how the Broncos are going to approach this, how do you go about putting together that offensive line?
I think you need to evaluate whether or not guys are capable of being what you want long term, and if they're not, then you need to move on. Do I need somebody as a stopgap this year? Okay, then there we go. But beyond that, move on. Find guys that work for you. I think Cam Fleming is a candidate to stick around. Quinn Meinertz is definitely going to be here. Garrett Bowles is a maybe. Beyond that, you really just don't know what you have. And Cam Fleming might be a guard. He might not be a tackle. He might wind up being a left guard. We'll see. So I think they need to the center position and the right tackle position need to have the biggest eye on them, and then you've got to figure out left guard as well, with Dalton Risner being a free agent. And I think center needs to be the most important, because the Broncos for the last few years, and we like Lloyd Cushenberry. We've loved talking to him, but at the end of the day, Lloyd did not get the job done, and they're going to have to find someone who will.
Well, he's going to be on this roster, but I'm with you on this, that even if he gets a chance at competing for the job, he is not incumbent by any stretch, certainly coming off of the injury anyways. But there's a certain amount of a decision to be made there. And, of course, you mentioned Graham Glasgow could be a guy they restructure, bring back. They could make a decision there. But I like what the Kansas City Chiefs did when they sort of revamped their offensive line. They spent pretty heavy when it came to free agency. Their free agency amount they spent on that. And then also when they went to the draft, they took some dart throws, right? They got some guys in the mid-late rounds. And I sort of think of the Broncos, who haven't really over the last several years made heavy investments on the offensive line. This might be a good example where, man, not only add a couple in free agency, but also add a couple in the draft. Bring in depth that you can develop, because look, you could have a Luke Wattenberg. Might take a little longer than you expected, but once in a while you get a guy kind of like that they were able to do out there in Kansas City that they can start for you either day one or soon after.
Yeah, I think if you look at this Broncos roster, there's really not a whole lot you need to do in the draft. I mean, you need to work on the offensive line, right? You need a reliable burner at speed. KJ's going to get a crack, Jalen Virgil's going to get a crack, but you need a reliable guy, so you're going to find a guy that can fly, right? So at the end of the day, you could basically spend your entire draft on the offensive line. You can really start working on in-house trying to build and do what Kansas City and Philadelphia, two teams that are in the Super Bowl, have done, and that is home grow yourself offensive line and a whole lot of offensive line depth too. And so that really, I think, needs to be the focus. After you find a few pieces here in free agency that you're kind of sort of missing, that needs to be the focus of the draft. Just getting that offensive line right for the future.
Well, and being open to trades. Like, again, Orlando Brown. At this point, you're not afraid to make trades when it comes to your draft picks as it is. Mm-hmm. So if you can acquire a guy that's going to help you right now, because you already have put yourself in a position of a window, right? You're not falling quite like the LA Rams script, but we're teetering towards it. Now, by next year, you have most of your draft picks. You got to swap there in the day two. But the point is right now you're looking at this thing and saying, boy, the biggest weakness on our team right now is probably the offensive line. I wouldn't be afraid if you have to flip one of those third-round picks and get an offensive tackle that you think makes you better right now.
Yeah, if there's somebody out there that does that, and you could look in free agency too. We talked about Mike McGlinchey and that possibility. If there's somebody out there that makes you better and you've got the ability to do it. But I do believe that they need a heavy commitment in this very limited draft in terms of capital on investing in the offensive line. Maybe finding one guy that can fly at receiver, but beyond that, you just need to hammer that offensive line. And I tell you what, down there at the Senior Bowl, I saw a punter that looked pretty good too. It might be time to look at that too.
Might be time. All right, for Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight.
Denver's gonna win it. You can stand up and salute in Denver, and you got the world champions that live in your town.